Hi, everybody. I'm Matt.
And I'm Steve.
And this is Marvel Reread Club. Welcome, everybody, and welcome to our special guest, one of our favorite comic book pencilers when we were growing up, Paris Cullins. Welcome, Paris.
How you guys doing?
We are doing well. We should explain that Paris is outside, so you're going to be hearing some background noise, but we're going to try to remove some of that in post-production. So, Paris, what are you up to right now? Why are you outside? Where are you? What are you doing?
I would like to say I'm retired, but actually, I guess I'm reintegrating myself in the comic book sphere.
Okay.
But from a different angle. I retired from the military. I retired kind of from comics for a little while. I got re-hitched. I'm a father of several children, and I had my own money. And I was kind of like caught up in just doing what I felt like doing. I've been invited to many conventions and other people's projects. And some work for like Nintendo.
Oh, nice.
What's the Netflix or something like that? And I set up in my own head now to make my own thing. And I'm working with a guy right now for Indy Speedway. His name is Ben Sutherland.
Uh-huh.
And he's doing Indy Speedway, and they're making their own comics along with several friends of ours. And independent comics and alternative magazines.
Very cool.
Nice.
Well, that's great. I'm so glad you're getting back into it. You were always one of my favorites. I mean, let's talk about some of the comics that you were best known for in the 80s and 90s. You first became famous for doing Blue Devil, which was a very fun comic with Gary Cohn. We were talking before we started recording about Gary Cohn and how much I liked some of the work he did. Then you did a really great run on Blue Beetle, the first time he had really ever had his own comic.
Yeah.
With Len Wein as the writer. And then you did my favorite run of yours, which is you and at first Jim Starlin and then Mark Evanier did a New Gods comic. I am just a huge fan of your New Gods work. I think it is a worthy follow-up to Jack Kirby's run on that book. You were stuck in a situation where first with Blue Beetle, you were taking over from Steve Ditko, and then with New Gods, you were taking over from Jack Kirby. That's got to be intimidating, right?
It was all intimidating. I was home and just about out of college. And my mother calls me downstairs because I've been sending work back and forth to several companies, but DC in particular, because I always loved the New Gods.
Yes.
And Blue Beetle in particular, and we'll get to that story in a second. But my mother calls me, Paris, somebody wants to talk to you, some guy named Dick Giordano. And I said, really? He's on the phone right now. And I said, okay. I ran downstairs and grabbed the phone. Oh, I picked up the phone. Are you Paris? I said, yes. It's, are you the one who sent all that work to me? We've got about 60 to 70 pages of work, boards, and it's on every kind of crazy thing. And some of the stuff is just scribbled. What were you doing? I was just trying to get a job. He says, well, I'm giving you a job, but you still have to come up here and audition. Mm-hmm. Don't bring any more because we filled up our closets. We don't need any more auditions of that sort. Just come in and we'll see where we go. And I got there and she took me there herself. Then she took me to Marvel. I took me to Marvel and took me there. And they both started to hire me, but DC's the one that linked me up with Keith Giffen. Mm-hmm. I was just starting, and Dick Giordano was teaching all of us in his intern program.
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
And
you were considered an intern at DC Comics at first. I don't think that was a long-lived program. One doesn't think of the DC having interns today, certainly.
If you walk in the door and they've already given you an assignment, but someone's not doing something at the table right now that wasn't supposed to be done or needed to be done, and they go, hey,
right.
Can you draw a superhero on a chair? I guess. Draw it. And then somebody writes me a little check. And I walked in the door and somebody found me something to do.
So that's kind of like what at Marvel they would refer to as the bullpen.
Yes.
Okay.
You know?
All right.
Blue Beetle was a beautiful book with you were definitely adapting your style. I read on Wikipedia that Blue Devil was originally pitched to Steve Ditko for Ditko to do, and he said no, and then it eventually came to you. But then you had Blue Beetle, which you were very much inheriting from Ditko. Did you grow up with a sense of who Ditko was?
Not that I grew up with just a sense of, I'll tell you a Steve Ditko story in a minute, but the first comic book I got was from my mother. She used to read me Captain America all the time. Mm-hmm. But for Christmas came, my brothers, they were a little older than me, a middle child, and she was telling me, well, Paris, I don't have that much money, and I had to get everybody a present and whatnot, and your brothers, they needed the bike, and I know you didn't need a bike. I didn't spend that kind of money on you. He says, trust me, you're going to love your Christmas present. And so when Christmas came and everybody got these toys and everything, and she put me a little package, I opened it up, and it was a pack of Charlton comics.
Oh, wow.
It was Blue Beetle, Judo Master, Peacemaker, and it was some kind of scary book, Haunted Mansion or something.
So why on earth were they Charlton Comics? Charlton was such a minor publisher at the time. How did she end up getting you Charlton Comics instead of DC or Marvel?
But there was Steve Ditko, and I was the biggest fan of Steve Ditko you ever met. Trust me, I love that guy from every angle. And so when I saw that, this is the absolute truth. It was like a light went off, and you go, oh, yeah. I want to draw Blue Beetle.
Wow.
And
what are you gonna do? Now I want to draw Blue Beetle.
And then you got to, my God, you're still one of the only people who's ever gotten to do a monthly Blue Beetle book. And you eventually got to do it. That's amazing. You were, I'm sure, one of the few kids who was introduced to comics through Charlton Comics. And then you're one of the only people who ever got to draw Blue Beetle regularly. That's fantastic.
And I got that job truthfully from both ends, from Len Wein.
Yes.
So I was finishing the third issue of it. It had to be done quickly, but it wasn't such an overnight thing that I had to go home. I sat in the McDonald's, and I spent most of my work done in the McDonald's. And then while I was doing it, somebody walks over and goes, is that the Blue Beetle? I said, yeah. He says, who's the guy still doing that? And I said, me. But I looked up, and it was Steve Ditko.
What? In a McDonald's?
It was Steve Ditko. And he sat down, and he says, well, I'm going to go over there in the corner. I said, I'm going to go buy myself a hamburger and some fries. And he said, bring me a hamburger and we can talk.
Wow.
He didn't need it. He just did it as fun.
Wow.
So I went up and we talked on the second level of the McDonald's on 52nd and Broadway. I talked about him and the life, which he doesn't talk much. Everybody tells me he doesn't talk much. But he gave me a long conversation. And it was interesting. He said that's the time he always goes to McDonald's. It was 2:00 in the morning.
Wow.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So did he approve of you doing the book?
He said not only that, he said he knew who I was studying from. He says, that is Bridgman. And I said, yes, it is. I said, I study Bridgman because I can see you came from Bridgman. He says, you can see that I came from Bridgman.
Nice.
That's great.
Nice.
Sorry, who is Bridgman? I don't know who Bridgman is.
Bridgman is an anatomy book, Constructive Anatomy.
Yeah.
Okay.
By Bridgman.
Yeah, it's one of the books that like upcoming illustrators and comics artists are often told to go and get that, along with Bern Hogarth's books and a bunch of others.
That's right.
Well, that's great. What a great story.
Yeah. I'm
so glad that you were able to get Ditko's seal of approval for taking over his book.
Right.
And you did a great job with it.
Well,
yes.
Let's go ahead and get into these issues that we're going to be talking about here. Matt, would you mind if I went ahead and took Amazing Spider-Man?
Let's go ahead and begin with Amazing Spider-Man number 59 then.
Yeah, let's do it. So this is the Brand of the Brainwasher. On the cover, you've got Spider-Man knocking out some goons backstage while Mary Jane is shaking it out front, a lit stage. It looks like she is wearing the same dress that Jan Van Dyne was of an issue of Avengers just recently. So
yeah, sort of covered in shiny Post-it notes.
Yes.
But it is a gorgeous dress. This is just a gorgeous cover. She looks so good.
And yes, she's shaking it.
Yep.
Yeah.
So
she looks great.
So just to give a quick sum up of the story, Spider-Man is getting harassed by the cops because that's who he is now at this point after his run-in with Doc Ock and everyone thinking he was a bad guy. He shakes them off and goes to the hospital and is able to reunite himself with Aunt May. And she is very glad to see him, but he learns that he has been reported as a missing person. So he has to go to the cops, turn himself in, and they're like, well, what happened? And he just is like, well, yeah, okay, the Daily Bugle says that I was kidnapped by Spider-Man, and so, yeah, that's what happened. I was kidnapped by Spider-Man. But Spider-Man is brainwashed, and then he got unbrainwashed and let me go. Captain Stacy, meanwhile, is like, oh, okay, yeah, thanks for letting me know. I'm pretty convinced that Spider-Man's a good guy. Come back to my house. And so he goes back to his house, and in walks Gwen, who is very, very happy to see Peter. Captain Stacy looks almost a little too happy to see his daughter kissing on Pete. There's something a little almost like creepy in the way that he's looking at them as they reunite. One way or the other, Pete is able to catch up with the rest of his friend group. We see that there is a new nightclub that's being opened up by who we're going to find out is the so-called brainwasher. Their plot is to have go-go dancers, basically, who are going to go around and take photos of all of the rich and important people who come in, and the camera is going to be a brainwashing camera.
This whole story is predicated on the notion that the most trustworthy and dependable people in the city are all going to sit in a sleazy nightclub watching go-go dancers who,
This was the era of the Playboy Club.
It was. I guess so.
And is it just me, or does the gangster who's on the top of page 9, does he look like Foswell?
Yeah.
Yeah,
he does.
Anyway.
I always like Foswell.
Oh, yeah. It's a shame that they ended up killing him off. We see that Mary Jane tries out for the gig and gets the job. Pete and his friends all are invited to this, presumably because they know Mary Jane, or possibly because Harry is also a rich and connected person himself. One way or the other, the whole thing's going on. She's dancing. She's taking photos. She takes one of Captain Stacy. He then wanders off in a trance, and when he doesn't come back in a while, Peter Parker takes off as Spider-Man, goes backstage, starts knocking out goons, finds that Mary Jane is being taken hostage. He's able to free her, and she is very grateful. And then we find out at the very end that the brainwasher is actually, dun dun dun, the Kingpin. Next-ish, oh, bitter victory. Paris, how about you first? What thoughts might you have to share?
So, Paris, wait, before you interject, Paris, let me say that one interesting thing about this issue is that it's co-written by Stan Lee and John Romita, but then John Romita is seemingly doing layouts, and then Don Heck is finishing the penciling, and then Mickey DeMeo is doing heavy inks. So I've talked about this before as sort of a Romita DeMeo sandwich, with Heck being sort of squeezed in the middle. So that's one of the things I'd like to hear you talk about, is how you feel about the art in this issue with just a little bit of Heck being put into this Romita DeMeo sandwich.
As I grew up reading comics, and that was the best part about being old, is that, you read it and you were figuring out on your own what they were using in terms of technique, because Heck's work was actually very sharp. And I was told by friends that he was also a fashion illustrator, that like Romita, being in the fashion business gave him, a sharper eye on how commercial products looked. Mm-hmm. And
yes.
So the work had this perfect fashion connected to the 60s world. And it looked right. And the lines were sharp and crisp, and though sometimes the interpretation of what their movements or their looks were, he was still learning how to do it, because you can see there's like Romita hands, and then there's I did it very quickly, and then he inked over quickly, and it looks like a different thing altogether sometimes.
Yes.
But as a whole, the story being told in that continuous, specific style held up and made the world, more contemporary. The world became more understandable from their style together than anything else. It's the same thing for one of my favorite inkers that inked so old, and that was Bill Everett. Mm-hmm. His work had a very specific style on Jack and other people, and it fit the modern world. It just came from the old world. His work was clean and precise and created the texture that wasn't in the other comics. You know?
Yeah.
And
I think that's a good point.
I always loved that about it. You know, especially handling eyebrows. you draw John Romita characters, you got to know how to do the eyebrows. Otherwise, they're no fun.
In some places, I think Heck over Romita is not as good as Romita would have been by himself. I think that the splash page is an example of that. How you've got Spider-Man really with no spotting of blacks on him, which is something that Heck would do sometimes. Even though Spider-Man is under a spotlight right now, you would think that if you were going to be under a spotlight, you would have very heavy shadows on you. But he does not have heavy shadows on him, which seems more like a Heck problem than a Romita problem to me.
Well, no, that has more to do with, once again, the world of what comic books are really built on.
Yeah.
No matter what we want to say in the compliment of how much I love them and everything, it is still what they termed, or what my art teacher termed as, it's a throwaway medium. Mm-hmm. And that means it's got to come out on time, it's got to be done on time. At the same time, you've got to convey an idea in a way that's okay, at least. Not perfect, but okay. So masters like John Romita come far. Don Heck is master, but what it was he was mastering was keeping all the lines, meaning the foreground and background and the midground, looking connected. Not so easy. People don't know that, but it's not so easy to do the pieces together. Every once in a while, walk into it and look at Don Heck's pencils. And then you say, oh, wow, his work is almost better than everybody else's in terms of his application of keeping it all cohesive.
All right.
And knowing that, now when you know that, you recognize who's the master. Iron Man doesn't remind me of Spider-Man. Iron Man reminds me of an industrial plant with giant steel plates and giant molten drums and stuff like that. And it looks more like pig iron, and it looks more rendered.
Yeah, I thought that Don Heck's best book at Marvel was Iron Man. I thought he was pretty well suited to Iron Man. And I think he's a little less well suited here. Well, I think he's just in this very bizarre situation here. It's interesting you point out that they were both connected to fashion illustration. And that is something they definitely have in common. And one thing that they're doing a great job with fashion in this issue, that we're them working together. The fashions look great in this issue. So it's interesting to point out that they were both sort of tapping into their roots here. I think that, generally speaking, Heck and Romita are different enough that they form an odd combo here. Anyway, we should go ahead and move on to another book. Should we go ahead and do Daredevil?
Yeah, let's please do.
All right, let's do Daredevil number 39. Here comes Daredevil, the Man Without Fear. Deadlier than ever, the Unholy Three. I guess they're deadlier because there used to be 4 of them, and now they've gotten rid of Frogman, and that makes them deadlier. And they've renamed themselves the Unholy Three. Apparently, this has been going on for a while, because when Daredevil sees them, he's like, look, it's the Unholy Three. And it's like, wait, last time you saw them, Daredevil, weren't there 4 of them? And aren't you wondering where Frogman is? I guess these 3 have been at this for a while. Says, a Stan the Man Lee and Gene the Dean Collins star-studded super thriller, extravagantly embellished by George Tuska, luminescently lettered by Artie Simek, agonizingly applauded by Irving Forbush. So we begin with classic Colin swinging illustration where you can see his body in multiple positions as he's swinging, sort of similar to what Carmine Infantino would do over at DC. He's swinging around when he runs into, it's now just Ape-Man, Catman, and Birdman, aka the Unholy Three. There was an interesting article in Comics Should Be Good, the Brian Cornyn blog this week, about how the Unholy Three have been there for some of the biggest moments in Marvel history, how they were the villains in the first New X-Men storyline, how they were the villains in the first Frank Miller Daredevil comic, and how they're swinging above their weight class quite a bit in terms of their place in Marvel history. This issue is unfortunately not one of those legendary issues. Daredevil fights the Unholy Three for several pages. I saw you complain about this online, Steve, that he gets thrown through a plate glass window. And he thinks, heads up, Dee Dee, you're sailing into a plate glass window. Have to thrust out my arms to cushion the impact. Yeah, that's not how that works.
No.
But, that wouldn't work out really well. Go back to Foggy and Karen. Foggy is really pissed at Daredevil because Daredevil was hassling his ex-con girlfriend.
Or it was actually Dr. Doom.
Yes, it was actually Dr. Doom in Daredevil's body. Matt is wearing a double-breasted suit, which makes the whole thing look kind of like Watchmen here. I associate double-breasted suits with Watchmen, but I guess they were briefly in fashion in 1968.
On that page, I will point out that Foggy and Karen and Foggy's girlfriend are all going to be going out on a big double date. And Foggy then says, "Great, I knew we'd make a swinger out of Matt sooner or later." I don't know if swinger yet had the same connotation that it would a few years later.
No, I don't think so. So we see the Animen are no longer working for some of the people they used to work for. They used to work for someone called the Organizer, I think. Now they're working for someone called... Wait... What's he called?
I keep on forgetting. I went back and double checked it this morning so I wouldn't have this moment, and I've already had it again. I do not remember. The
Exterminator.
Yes.
They're working for a guy called the Exterminator. I kind of like his look. Generally, Cullen isn't the best designer of costumes, but I like the Exterminator's purple and white look. He has invented one of the dumbest comic devices of all time. It is a device that can send you forward into the future by half an hour. And I read this and I'm like, okay, I don't want to brag, but I have a device that can send me forward into the future by half an hour. And I use it 48 times a day. Like anyone can go forward into the future by half an hour. That is the easiest thing in the world to do. You do not need a special device to do that. So then he seemingly obliterates Gorilla Man, and then Gorilla Man reappears half hour later. They're like, this is the best device in the world. And so let's go ahead and attack a party with it. They go ahead and attack the nightclub where we have Matt Murdock and Karen Page and Foggy Nelson and his ex-con girlfriend are all there celebrating. I think Cullen does a really nice job with the party. This is not the only time he'll be throwing a party this month, and I think he does a really nice job with it. Oh, well, so it's interesting. We have Tuska inking Cullen for the first time, and I think that he does a pretty good job. I actually found myself wondering if this was Giacoya.
I said he did a great job.
Yeah, I think Tuska is doing a good job here. So then the Exterminator and the Endermen attack the party. They are shooting people with this gun that knocks people 30 minutes into the future. They shoot Foggy's girlfriend, but Daredevil can somehow sense that she's not dead and that she's still semi-present and will reappear. So he's trying to figure that out while Foggy is really upset. And then we just get a little preview of next issue when Daredevil is going to be hit by the gun. And that is it for this issue. What did you guys think of the issue? Let's start with you, Paris. What do you think of this issue?
Here's a crazy moment. You're bringing up the plate glass window. You know, I got caught up on a street in Philadelphia, and it's a butcher shop, and they were having some gang in North Philly. They picked me up and threw me through the window.
What?
Oh, no.
Yeah, they did, right? And the window did break, but it broke like in 4 pieces, and they were big chunks.
Oh, my.
So it didn't like shatter and glass go everywhere. It didn't. That's not what happened. I got cut across the arm.
Wow.
And the other guy picked up another piece and stabbed at me and opened my hand up.
Yikes.
Oh, my God. Yikes.
No, yeah, but then I fought them off. They went home. For a little kid, it all got started. Once the guy started swinging the thing, and I started swinging a piece of glass I had, and the other said, "Leave him alone, get out of here," and he ran off or whatever. But it was big chunks of glass. It didn't break in little pieces. You know, it didn't go like you watch those movies and there's glass everywhere.
Right.
That's not what happened.
Well, I guess they must not have had tempered glass yet at that point, or it must not have been tempered glass, because
it probably wasn't.
Yeah. Well,
I'm glad you're okay. That was a scary story.
But what you're saying is, it's the same way I felt about it when I saw it. I went, guys like Jim Steranko, Jack Kirby, they know how to make when the glass is supposed to collapse and shatter around and make a specific rhythm. And that makes the glass look like it's all shattering at the same time, or shattering in a way that it cascades and falls in a way that you believe that it's glass and it's separate little pieces.
Yeah.
And that's what mattered more than anything else. But one way or the other, the idea came across. I've always been a fan of Gene Colan's work, and whenever I saw him, his wife was with him. She was like his bodyguard or something.
Sure.
Yeah, I think I ran into him at a convention a time or two. I think I may have seen him with his wife.
A gentleman, quiet soul, and always knows what he's talking about. So.
All right. Well, in terms of my opinions on this story, I wasn't as big a fan of Tuska's inking on this one as it sounds like you two were. I think in particular that one panel about being a swinger, something about the way that Foggy's finger is in front of Karen's face.
Right.
I really think that George Tuska as inker should have done some stuff to try to make that a little bit clearer, and I don't feel that he did. So anyway, that's just one small example. But the other thing about this is that the only...
That's George Tusker was doing the inking?
Yeah.
I think so.
He probably was he didn't know how to handle, because it's not easy to ink. Trying to interpret Gene Colan?
No, it is not.
No. He's pure rendering versus the line work.
Yes.
Yeah, he's probably the sketchiest penciler in Marvel or DC history, and infamously the hardest to ink.
Yeah, so I'm going to give him the break because I wouldn't know how to approach that either.
But I
In the beginning,
one of the things I find is that with the Animen, or I guess now the Unholy Three, the only thing I found really visually interesting about them was that their human faces happened to resemble the animals that they were, and Gene Colan just doesn't go with that at all. Catman looks entirely different. Ape Man looks like he's actually got an ape head.
Right.
It's as opposed to having a head that looks like an ape. It looks like he actually is an ape-headed person. The only thing that made this group of villains interesting has been dropped here.
Back when Wally Wood was drawing them, you mean?
Yeah, when Wally Wood was drawing correctly.
And even Foggy Nelson is a little, it's like they haven't made up his mind about what his face was going to be at right there.
Yeah.
You know?
All right, so shall we move on to Thor?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Let's do Thor number 151.
Thor 151, To Rise Again, and I will not forget the credits again this time. Powerfully presented in pulse-pounding Panoramascope by Stan the Man Lee and Jack King Kirby, embellished by Vince Colletta, lettered by Sam Rosen, inspired by Asgard Eternal. So Thor is in the middle of this lengthy multi-issue battle with the Wrecker, and then now the Wrecker has been replaced by the Destroyer here. The Destroyer is being animated by the spirit of Sif, who came here to try to help Thor, but she is losing control of the Destroyer, and Thor has no idea that the Destroyer is not just trying to destroy things. Thor is also depowered still, so there is a lot of knockdown, drag-out fight. Well, once again, depowered, but still has the strength of an Asgardian, which is a lot.
Right.
In the land of the Norns, we see that Karnilla, the Norn Queen, and Loki are both watching this battle. Sif is there in a trance because her spirit is in the body of the Destroyer, but then Balder is also there all tied up, and apparently Karnilla has the hots for Balder, and it's just like, hey, Balder, come on, you want some of this. But then it seems that the trolls end up walking in. We'll come back to that in a moment. The fight on Earth continues between the Destroyer and Thor until eventually Odin is able to see what's going on finally, and then is like, okay, you know what? I'm giving his power back. And page 10, just the resplendent Kirby helmet and armor as Odin stands there re-bestowing Thor's power upon himself
it is a bizarre page. The shapes, the sizes of everything make no sense. I love the helmet. I love the armor. But if his hand is reaching towards us, the hand should be at least twice as big as it is. And if his boots are smaller, I understand he's a big guy, but those are really big boots.
Well, I saw this and I just loved it. So.
In terms of costume design, it is gorgeous. I love that. In terms of pose, it's gorgeous, but just the foreshortening leaves a lot to be desired.
Thor now has his power back, but doesn't realize it. He feels like, wait a minute, I feel like I'm having a surge of power, but I'm not quite sure why. But he doesn't recognize that he has his magical powers back until Mjolnir returns to his hand. At which point he's like, aha, I've been restored. Meanwhile, in the land of the Norns, the trolls are there, and I guess that they had been vassals to Karnilla or something like that, and that they're now fighting back. But then Balder says, oh, I tell you what, Karnilla, set me free and I will defend you. But then now that means he's just gotten himself free. So that's it. And as we leave this, Thor is still fighting the Destroyer and is backed into a blind alley. Next, the Wrath of the Warrior. So, Paris, give me your thoughts on this Jack Kirby smorgasbord.
He's the best. His ability to catch the dynamic of what's most important, you have to pay attention to, is always Jack Kirby's gift. He makes anatomy, because it's like, there's Baldo putting a blade to a mace, and you can feel all the tension. You can feel the hand pushing the blade into the mace, because he's shifting the weight of all that bulk, looking forward. But there's not one piece of actual shoulder being drawn. There's not one tricep, bicep, or even forearm that you can actually recognize. But he understands what's most important is the controlled structure of the shape. So whether it's you're carving a statue or cutting a piece of wood, it is how you make the work lean and move, makes the action happen. And there it is, a perfect of not doing something, but making everything out of it. I think it's what made him Jack Kirby to me, because I wasn't a fan of his in the beginning. In the beginning, I thought everything he was doing was wrong. And then one day my mother said to me, this guy's a virtuoso of objectivity, of structure. He's just, everything always happens because he's making one piece of structure lean or pull or fall against another. And then when you really look at them, they're not actual physical shapes as so much they're geometric pieces. And they always work. And once I got what my mother was saying, I fell in love with the work.
It's interesting that your mom seems like she was a big comics fan.
My mother was she read me Captain America.
Right.
She's the one who got me into comic books.
All right. Well, that's fantastic.
That's so cool. Yeah, and then you got to eventually take over from Kirby on New Gods, and you got to...
She's the one who took me to Marvel. She's the one who introduced me to Stan Lee at her college.
Oh, wow.
Oh, wow.
Stan Lee gave me an interview and gave me a chance to bring some work to him to show her.
That's great.
Now, it could be because my mother looked a lot like Sophia Loren. And it could be because she had great legs. But one way or the other, because he did say to her, he could come bring me to work for me next week on Friday, and I'll take a look. And he says, he's telling that to me, but he says, bring your mom too. That's how it began, and that's how it ended.
That's great. So, Matt, do you have some thoughts on this issue before we move on?
Yeah, I thought that Colletta is better than usual. I thought that the cover is so good. I was doubting whether it was Colletta. I eventually convinced myself it was Colletta, but the highest compliment I can ever give Colletta is to say it doesn't look like Colletta. The splash page, it's more obvious because, as always, the way you can tell Colletta is there's too many lines on the elbows, and there's too many lines on the elbows on the splash page, but otherwise it's really beautiful. And the whole issue is really beautiful, even beautifully inked. I would go so far as to say Carnilla is always great. Kirby loves Carnilla. Kirby loves this sort of very evil woman, which he doesn't get to draw a lot. As I said, the hand should be much bigger on page 10. I'm very suspicious on page 12 that there are no backgrounds on the entire page. We all know that Kirby didn't do that, but we know that Colletta was infamous for erasing Kirby's backgrounds.
Yes, he was.
And I'm quite confident that he erased the backgrounds on at least the first panel of page 12. But other than that, I thought it was a really good issue. The Destroyer storyline doesn't advance very much, but I'm glad that Thor finally gets his powers back, and that is enough. What about Colletta, Paris? What are your feelings on Colletta?
I'm very prejudiced. I like Vince Colletta because, once again, he's somebody I met. Mm-hmm. And I met him in all the strangest circumstances. And so I met him when he was working for Jim Shooter, and I met him when we had to do some fixing work, and so Vince Colletta did remove a few things that he wasn't supposed to, and we were told to put them back on, and it was like details. It was details on the arrow, and it wasn't there. He just kind of made it like a bow that you put your hands around, and that's not what it was at all.
So you had the job of restoring stuff that Vince Colletta had hastily removed.
Yes.
Okay.
All right.
That's great.
But meeting him was always fun. He pretended he was like a wise guy. He wasn't. He was just a nice guy. He says, you're going to have to fix that. We're going to send some guys to make you fix it. That's when he say something like that to me. He was funny.
So your take on that whole story is that he was playing up like he had some kind of a good fella background, but he was mainly just making it up.
Yeah, for all I know, he did have one, but I don't know. That's not the person I met. You meet a guy in an art room, and that's all you really know.
Right.
No matter what comes out their mouth.
Right.
You just go, okay.
Right. Right.
So I should say that there's briefly a Triton backup story where he gets free of the movie people who had him captive and then goes to New York City.
Those Inhuman stories in the back were always great work.
Yes. Inked by Sinnott.
Anytime you have scales that are inked by Sinnott, that's always just the best. But yeah, basically he just breaks free from this cage where they're going to try to put him on exhibit, and then he goes swimming off towards New York City where he is intending to learn more about humans. That's pretty much the story.
So I should say my last favorite thing about this issue is one of the letters in the letter column by Stephen Sheets of Chesapeake, Ohio, is a poem about how upset he is that the Warriors 3 are no longer part of the book since they got rid of Tales of Asgard. And it is beautifully written, and I will bring it up again later because it compares positively to another poem we are going to hear later in this episode. So I will bring that up then. But should I go ahead and do maybe the Iron Man Submariner special next?
I was thinking we were going for Hulk next, but we could do either one.
Okay, let's do Hulk next.
Okay.
That's good because that's the issue I was talking about.
Okay. Good.
Let's go ahead and talk about The Incredible Hulk number 102. So this is the first solo issue of The Incredible Hulk. This was Tales to Astonish 101 last issue, featuring the Hulk and Submariner. Now the Submariner bizarrely has pulled off to share a book with Iron Man just for 1 month. And then the Hulk gets this issue all to himself. So it's no longer called Tales to Astonish. It's called The Incredible Hulk 102. He has his big logo and everything. And then you have this big problem with almost all of the Marvel comics this month.
Can I say one thing?
Yes.
You know, I personally think we've all been cheated, and I'm hoping they'll fix it. But I think we've all been cheated out of our own Submariner. I don't think anybody could play Submariner more than Dwayne Johnson. He looks like Submariner with clothes on, with clothes off. He just looks like the Submariner. You know, he's okay as Black Adam, but I'd rather have the Submariner.
It's funny. Back when I was working at Scholastic Books, we used to sit around and talk about who should play different superheroes. And we said Benedict Cumberbatch should be Doctor Strange. So that came true.
Right, yes.
But then we said we all agreed Namor had to be Jason Momoa. And then Jason Momoa ended up being Aquaman instead of Namor. Anyway, let's go ahead and get into this issue, The Incredible Hulk, big premiere issue. So we have this huge problem facing so many Marvel Comics this month in that so many Marvel Comics either already have or are about to expand into their own books. And so they feel the need to include origins, but they're all of them in the middle of storylines. And it's very hard to shoehorn an origin into the middle of a storyline. And I would say none of these books do it well. I think this is a beautiful Marie Severin cover of the Hulk turning into Bruce Banner.
Right.
I'm not sure who inks it. I don't think it's inked by Tuska. So then we get to the big heartbreak of this issue. I loved last issue where you once again had Stan Lee writing the Warriors 3. The Warriors 3 are three of my favorite Marvel characters, and they were being written by Stan Lee, who does such a good job, especially with Volstag's dialogue. Well, unfortunately, Stan is gone. It says Stan Lee panoramically presents this pulse-penning premiere by Gary Friedrich and Marie Severin, inked by George Tuska, once again, lettered by Artie Simek. I think Tuska inking Severin is not as good as Trimpe inking Severin was in the last several issues, but I think he does okay. Gary Friedrich, however, I think really lets us down on this storyline. We have two splash pages in a row. We have the Hulk turning into Bruce Banner as he was leaping across that chasm, and then he's falling. This makes no sense. At the bottom of the chasm, just hanging out in the bottom of a chasm like you do, are the Exterminator and...
not the Exterminator.
That was in Daredevil.
Yes.
The Executioner and the Enchantress are just hanging out at the bottom of the chasm. And apparently if he kept falling in this chasm, he would have gone back to Earth. But instead they're like, nope, let's grab him and use him for our purposes. The Warriors 3, meanwhile, are like, well, I guess he's dead. Okay, well, let's go find out who he is. Fine, let's go to the Oracle, who we were going to talk to, and pound on the gong and talk to the Rhyming Oracle. And then the Rhyming Oracle says, oh, well, now's a good time to tell you the origin of the Hulk in rhyme. And so then she tells us the origin of the Hulk in rhyme, which is a bizarre way to tell his origin. Like, oh, what's the best way to tell the Hulk's origin? Let's have the Warriors 3 listening to a rhyming oracle telling the origin. Okay, so then we get a pretty good recap of the Hulk's origin, and it's good to get Marie Severin get a chance to draw it. A couple of changes from the original origin. Apparently, they put Rick and Bruce Banner in this room for several days in this version. Right. I thought that was odd. It says, then after days of agonizing tests, they left the doctor alone to rest. So then he finally becomes the Hulk. They have him green right away. Later, they'll say, no, he was gray before he was green, which is how it actually was in the comics. But then it takes him a while to re-retcon the comics to say, no, he was gray for a while. But I gotta say, this poem is just awful. That here's my favorite line from the poem. But lo, there was no easy way for such as he men to impound, and so he stalked like beast at bay for men to hunt and hate and hound. I mean, that is just terribly written. There was no easy way for such as he men to impound. Like, that is such awkward writing. Compare this to the poem of the guy who wrote in the back of Thor to complain about the Warriors 3 not being there. They should have hired that guy to write this poem instead of Gary Friedrich. And Volstagg is tremendously out of character. I think this is the first time he's been written by anybody but Stan Lee. He's the wrong kind of braggart. He's the wrong kind of coward. It just doesn't ring quite right. So then we have another problem in that the Executioner remembers fighting the Hulk back in Tales to Astonish number 77, but that was a version of the Executioner 1,000 years in the future. The Hulk remember the Executioner because he fought him 1,000 years from now, but the Executioner shouldn't remember the Hulk. Meanwhile, Army of Trolls attack. I'm not going to go through it all. They get in a big fight. Severin does a good job drawing Asgard on page 14. Finally, Odin shows up, and Odin's like, what's the Hulk doing here? He doesn't belong in Asgard, and sends him home. And that is the end of the issue. As if you hadn't already guessed, to be Hulk-inued. So, I summed that up rather quickly. Well, first slowly and then quickly. But, Paris, what did you think of this issue?
Not their best. You can say it's not their best. And even back there, what's his name? The Executioner is screaming, and he looks more like he's got a mouth guard instead of teeth. It was kind of weird. They're going, is that a mouth guard? Is he boxing now? I don't know. And there's, what's his name? Odin with a very innocuous object in his hand. It's supposed to be one of the Odin wands, but it's coming off a little odder than that. And although there's one troll that's falling down, he actually kind of looks like he's having fun.
Yeah, I do like how Marie Severin sticks with the idea of always giving Odin a different helmet. Jack Kirby had a rule that Odin always had to have a different helmet every time we saw him. And Marie Severin gives him a nice original helmet here.
Yeah, but he's generally dressed pretty plainly. He basically just showed up in his boxers and his undershirt here, more or less, by Odin's standards. There's a couple of things.
A streetcar named Hulk. Yeah, I understand. Stella! I'm sorry, Banner. Okay.
Just a couple things for me to mention here. During the recap of his origin, he seems to be a little bit more murderous than he was in the comics. Now, there was that moment when it looked like he was just about to murder Rick Jones, but other than that, he was never really much of a killer. But there's a lot of things here where he's like, men must die, which doesn't come across quite right. But I also love when the Hulk ends up using the Executioner as a weapon, just grabs him by the ankle and he's swinging him around to knock out trolls with the Executioner, which is
I like that.
Reminds me a little bit of the Avengers movie when Hulk does that to Loki. And then right there on the last page, there's one thing where they completely mix up who is who. Odin, speaking to Fandral, says, "What? Balder dares to interfere with the justice of Odin?" And then Hogan is starting to explain. And then Fandral says of Hogan, "Fandral speaks the truth, omnipotent one." So something went horribly, horribly wrong when it comes to both the copywriting and the editing on this one.
Yeah, what went wrong was they stuck something in the mead. And
something like that.
Fandral got a hold of it too early.
Yes.
Yeah. Everybody is drunken.
I always loved Marie Severin's work on the Hulk. I thought she was always trying to make them clumsy on purpose in the character of the art as well as the characters themselves. Because, somebody was always with one eye open, one eye closed. Their hands would be covering their face. Anytime they were upset about something, it always looked like they were getting their drink on and mad at the same time. And it was always her work more than his. Mm-hmm. I always liked that about it. It was odd and clumsy, but it had character.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
That's what I liked about it.
So, shall we move on to X-Men?
All right.
Yes.
Yes, let's do X-Men.
Okay, so X-Men's doing this thing where they have the X-Men logo very small, and they've got some other character's name that seems to be the title of the book. The X-Men featuring The Power of Magneto. And we have what looks very much like a John Buscema cover here. I'm assuming that's John Buscema.
Yeah, that is.
Oh, yeah, that's got to be Buscema.
Yeah. So Professor X has just died. There's a funeral going on, and Magneto has his little viewoscope.
So we should explain that it's Buscema doing the cover, but very much not doing the inside.
Yes, I'm sorry. Stan Lee presents with perspicacious pride this magnetized masterwork by Roy Thomas and George Tuska, inked by John Tartaglione, lettered by Sam Rosen. Tuska and Tartaglione, not the best art combination in the world, but we have had worse on X-Men.
Yeah, I like Tuska's work on this issue much better than Heck's work on the last couple of issues. You know, you were talking, Paris, about what books Heck was most suited for. I would say that X-Men is the book he's been least suited for. He really hasn't been doing a good job. And I'm very happy to have Tuska this issue, even though he's inked by Tartaglione, who is not an ideal inker for him.
So Professor X's funeral is going on, and Quicksilver apparently decides to make an appearance at the funeral. They seem to be assuming a relationship between Pietro and Professor X that I don't think I've ever seen before. Am I missing or forgetting something, or was there some... No, I'm not. Okay. They're just making this up here.
Quicksilver says to Wanda, oh yes, Professor X, our only friend. And it's like, they were never friends. This never happened in the comics.
Yeah, I was like, did I miss something? Is there something going on? Anyway, so Quicksilver shows up for the funeral, which of course there's rain at the funeral. There always has to be rain at the funeral. The X-Men think that he's there for nefarious purposes. They, of course, end up antagonizing each other. Magneto figures out that Quicksilver went off to do this, and he is not happy. The professor apparently left a, watch this video in case I die situation. So they go and they watch this video, and apparently he had some disease that was killing him, and he knew he was dying, and so he was training Jean to develop psychic powers in addition to her telekinesis so that she could help step in for him when he's gone. So it seems that Magneto on this barren island will just, whenever there's a ship going by, will just magnetically steal out of the ship whatever he needs, and then apparently just destroys the ship. So on page 7, he straight up murders a whole crew.
Yeah, it goes barroom.
Yeah. So like later when they end up rehabilitating Magneto, they kind of, they do deal with some of these situations, but there are a lot of people that he killed. So so Quicksilver returns to the island, and Toad is like, ooh, you in trouble. But Magneto is like, shut up, Toad. Yes, Quicksilver's in trouble, but I don't need to hear it from you. Reminds me of the Simpsons line when it says, you too, snitchy. Somehow the X-Men are able to figure out that Magneto needs a particular kind of something from a ship. So they are on a ship that gets knocked out by Magneto, and they're able to get onto his island through this. It makes no sense exactly what happened there, but one way or the other, it gets them on the island. Quicksilver is still fighting on behalf of Magneto, and at the very end, it looks like the X-Men have been zapped, and we're going to find out more next issue. Next ish, Red Raven. And there is a backup story, which just basically goes into how Cyclops' powers work. Essentially, it's solar-powered, and that's really all you need to know. But the credits for that, I guess, are none but editor Stan Lee could supervise such a minuscule masterpiece. None but writer Roy Thomas and artist Werner Roth could co-create such a diminutive drama. None but our ever-loving inker could possibly expect letterer Artie Simek to spell a name like John Verpoorten. But yes, apparently he's just basically a solar battery, and the power ends up coming out through his eyes.
Yeah. When this gets reprinted, it gets reprinted sometimes along with the Avengers issues that Buscema is doing, because this is sort of a check-in on a storyline that's been developing over in the Avengers. And I think it's worthwhile. I think this can stand up next to Buscema issues it is sometimes reprinted with, because I think that Tuska and Tartaglione are doing a much better job than Heck would have done on doing this. I think, having a Buscema cover on this is a big tease, and I wish he had been on the inside. Although the cover is somewhat ridiculous in that I've complained about this before, how they they don't like having all the heroes on the same plane, and they like to raise them up, even if it means swinging in on bizarre trapezes. And here we have Cyclops swinging in on a basically jungle vine to help attack Magneto. And it's like, okay, where did he get this jungle vine from to swing in on? I don't know. Tuska and Tartaglione did a really good job with the rain. Rain is a hard thing to do in comics. And the bottom of page 4 with everybody huddling in the rain is really nicely done. I thought this was a good issue. It's great to get a good old-fashioned X-Men versus Magneto issue. We've gotten that surprisingly rarely in this comic. I think that is the best use of the X-Men, is fighting Magneto, and they're doing it in this issue, and I like it.
Yeah. So, Paris, any other thoughts you have about this issue before we move on?
No, actually, I concur. I thought it got the point across. The storytelling was straightforward, and nothing was missed in terms of that. The art details could be a little better, but the truth of the matter is sometimes it's all about how it's blocked out more than anything else. And I liked how it turned out, too.
Okay. That wraps up one episode, but we're going to go and record 2 episodes with Paris. So let's go ahead and wrap this one up, and we'll say our goodbyes, and then we'll start immediately recording another episode with Paris, where we do the second half of the books from this month. I don't think we've ever said what month this is. Second half of the books from April 1968. Thanks so much for coming by, Paris. We will wrap this episode up. Okay, bye, everybody.
All right, take care. Stay safe out there.
Bye!
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed it, we now have a Patreon where you can show your appreciation. If you've got a few bucks, head over to patreon.marvelrereadclub.com to support us. Also, you can still rate and review us at your podcatcher of choice, and that would be greatly appreciated as well. You can find us online at marvelrereadclub.com, as well as Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, and Threads. See you next time.